Imagine being so cold that breathing itself could kill you, not from lack of air, but because the moment that freezing air hit your lungs, ice could form inside your chest. That wasn't a nightmare. That was Tuesday, 20,000 years ago. We like to imagine our ancestors as primitive, weak, barely surviving. But what if I told you the humans who lived through the Ice Age weren't just surviving? They were solving problems so extreme that modern survival experts still can't fully replicate their methods. So how did they do it? How did a species with no metal, no guns, no heated shelters, survived temperatures that dropped below -50 degrees Celsius? How did they hunt animals 10 times their size in total darkness for months at a time? And why do some of their strategies sound less like survival and more like something out of a horror film? Let's start with the obvious question. Where do you even live when the entire world is frozen? You'd think caves, but most Ice Age humans in Europe didn't have caves nearby, so they built something almost unbelievable: houses made entirely out of mammoth bones. At a site called Mezherych in Ukraine, archaeologists found circular huts built from the skulls, tusks, and leg bones of over 60 mammoths. 60. That's not a shelter, that's an engineering project. These structures were covered in animal hides and packed with snow for insulation, creating something eerily similar to a modern igloo, except built from the skeletons of the largest land animals on Earth. But here's where things get strange. To build one of these homes, you needed to kill or scavenge dozens of mammoths first, and a single adult mammoth could weigh over 6 tons. So how exactly did small groups of humans, using stone-tipped spears, take down an animal that outweighed them by a factor of 100? The answer isn't brute strength, it's psychology. Ice Age hunters used something researchers call persistence hunting, combined with terrain manipulation. They would drive massive animals toward cliffs, frozen rivers, or narrow gorges, turning the landscape itself into a weapon. It wasn't about out-muscling the mammoth, it was about outthinking it. And this is where it gets even more interesting, because surviving the cold wasn't just about shelter and food. It required something almost invisible: clothing so advanced that scientists only recently understood how sophisticated it really was. In 2003, a genetics team led by researcher Mark Stoneking studied human body lice, because body lice can only survive in clothing, not on bare skin. By tracing the genetic origin of these lice, the team estimated humans likely started wearing fitted, tailored clothing somewhere around 170,000 years ago. Not blankets thrown over shoulders, actual sewn garments. Then scientists discovered something even more specific: bone needles with tiny eye holes, found in sites like Denisova Cave in Siberia, dated back over 40,000 years. These weren't crude tools, they were precision instruments, fine enough to sew multiple layers of animal hide into wind-resistant, insulated clothing, the Ice Age equivalent of a high-performance winter jacket. That means the difference between life and death wasn't just fire, it was thread. But here's the real mystery. If Ice Age humans were dying from extreme cold and starvation, why do we find evidence of elaborate burials, jewelry, and art from this exact same period? At a site called Sungir in Russia, archaeologists uncovered the graves of 2 children buried around 34,000 years ago, covered in over 10,000 carefully carved ivory beads. Some estimates suggest each bead took nearly an hour to make. That means these 2 burials alone represent thousands of hours of labor, during an era when every single hour mattered for survival. So why would a starving, freezing community spend that much time and energy on the dead instead of the living? That's when everything changed in how researchers understood Ice Age society. This wasn't just about survival, it was about meaning. Anthropologists now believe these elaborate burials were a psychological survival tool, a way of reinforcing social bonds, group identity, and shared purpose. In an environment where isolation meant death, ritual and connection weren't luxuries,
They were strategy. But not every survival method was noble. Some were disturbing. At Gough's Cave in England, researchers found human bones from roughly 15,000 years ago with unmistakable cut marks, evidence of cannibalism. But here's the unsettling twist. Some of the skulls had been shaped into cups. Not out of aggression. Researchers believe this may have been ritualistic, possibly linked to extreme famine survival, or symbolic practices tied to death and memory that we still don't fully understand. Suddenly, survival doesn't look like a simple story of humans versus nature. It looks like humans constantly negotiating between biology, psychology, and desperation. And maybe that's the real lesson hiding underneath all of this.
We tend to think intelligence looks like technology, screens, engines, algorithms. But intelligence during the Ice Age looked like reading an animal's behavior well enough to predict its next move. It looked like turning a mammoth's skeleton into a home. It looked like understanding, instinctively, that a grieving community needed ritual as much as it needed food. Every method we've talked about, the bone houses, the tailored clothing, the elaborate burials, even the disturbing rituals, they all point to the same truth. Ice Age humans weren't just fighting to stay alive. They were building the earliest blueprint for everything we now call civilization. So the next time you complain about cold weather, remember this. Somewhere, 20,000 years ago, a group of humans stared down an ice age that should have erased our species entirely, and instead, they turned bones into shelter, hides into technology, and death into meaning. They didn't just survive the Ice Age. They rewrote what survival even means.